Being said, there's a lot going on in America right now. As you know, we've got an election coming up, and somebody who's been a very loud and very clear voice has joined us today. He's somebody very special to all of us. Dinesh D'Souza is with us. Dinesh, thank you for joining us.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have you here. Also with my friend, Pastor Tom Hughes. Tom Hughes is Hope for Our Times Prophecy Ministry. You're doing some incredible things. Glad to have you with us.
Oh, it's great to be here. I feel blessed to be in the company of both of you. This is fantastic.
Awesome. Well, let's, we definitely got a lot going on, but I want to ask you, Dinesh, let's talk about Trump right away. Why do you think that he inspires such radically opposed reactions?
Well, it is worth noting how unique this is because it's normal in politics to have, two sides, and there are people who like you, there are people who don't like you. That's conventional. But with Trump, you've got one group of people who would, I think, take a bullet for him if they had to. And then you've got another group of people who cheer, or maybe silently cheer, when someone tries to put a bullet in him. And I think to myself, I came to the United States as an exchange student at the age of 17. This was at the very end of the Carter years, right before Reagan was elected. And so I'm thinking back, at least to my adult lifetime, I can't think of a division that runs this deep over a political figure like Trump. You got to go back, I think, all the way to Lincoln to find a figure who inspired this kind of radically opposed reaction. And even in that case, it was different because with Lincoln, the division wasn't over the man. It was over the issues. It was over the extension of slavery and a lot of the polarization around that. But with Trump, it is over the man. And so I think it is important to look at Trump in a fresh way. I say this because certainly there's been an effort on the part of his critics to put a kind of Halloween mask on Trump, make him this ogre, and that's continuing right to the present, right? This latest report in The Atlantic that, he's a fan of Hitler. I mean, this stuff is so over the top, outrageous. But a lot of the people who say those things are sincere. And I think that kind of attack on Trump has laid the groundwork for the two assassination attempts, with perhaps others to come. In other words, the character assassination precedes and provides the logical foundation for actual assassination. I think there's something about Trump that is larger than life. And when the left says that he is a tyrant, a Caesar, a dictator, they are onto the extraordinary power of Trump. In my recent film, which is called Vindicating Trump, I got to talk to Trump up close, and I wanted to spring questions on him that he hadn't heard before. So I'm just giving you a sample of one that I tried on him. I go, hey, I said, they keep saying you called for an insurrection on January 6th. And I said, well, as far as I can see, you didn't do that. You didn't tell people to go in the Capitol or take over the place, stop the count, none of that. I said, but guess what? Had you called for one, there would have been one, a real one. And I said, and there'd be one if you called for one now. So I said, are you aware that you almost uniquely in America have that kind of power? And quite frankly, what do you want to do with it? How do you intend to deploy that power? And you can see Trump, he's surprised, his eyes go wide open. You can see the tumblers of his mind working. So Trump is different than conventional Republicans. And I think he terrifies the left, not because he's a threat to the country, but because he's a threat to them.
Yeah, you look at where we're at today in America, from a pastor's perspective, I look at what God has said towards the end of days we should be looking for, and I know, Pastor Tom, you already see this. If you look at the list that God has given us, many of those things are upon us today. And what we found is as pastors, we're always trying to get people to vote their values, vote the biblical values, not their values, the biblical values. What does God say? And what we found is for the most part, Trump is on the side of those biblical values, and we're left with a decision: who we're going to vote for, Kamala or Trump. And I think for the person who's looking at it purely from a biblical standpoint, it's obviously Trump, and he is a very polarizing character because of that. Where do you see us at America right now with this election upon us? Where do you see us headed as a nation?
We got huge problems. I think bigger than this country's ever faced before. Going back to the time of Lincoln, we can see that was huge. But we look now where we are. It's somewhat frightening. I know what the Bible says for the end, but I also understand America's position. And when I look at Trump, back to the previous question, Trump, I totally agree. He's a threat to the deep staters, whatever you want to call him. He's a threat to the globalists because there is this power about him. He has this influence over people. They do not like it. He can manipulate the masses. They don't know what he's going to do. But as I look at America, I mean, for me, if Kamala Harris becomes president, I cannot imagine the position. Well, I can imagine the position America will take on Israel because we see her.
Won't be good.
Yeah, we've seen her before she was the anointed Virgin Mary. Suddenly she's the one running, which is totally ridiculous. We know how she got into the place that she's at. We see that. I can look at abortion. I can see the dynamic of that. It'll be worse than anything our country has ever experienced before. Our freedoms will be gone. I look at back to the last 4 years, just what's happened to you or myself or you. You look at this and go, okay, this is very problematic. When she gets in there, you look at Tim Walz, you got to be kidding me. So when we look at this dynamic, we're shaping up for America, it's frightening. And looking at biblical values, Tim, you and I both have had this conversation many times. I'm not voting for the pastor in chief.
Right.
It's looking at and going, wait a minute, there's a very dark thing that is hanging over America. And it's infiltrated. I did a message a while back on the fifth column. And the fifth column is that column that is inside of a nation that is sympathetic to the enemy. We have that in the schools. We have it in Washington. We have it here in Sacramento. And it's hugely problematic. And Kamala Harris is their anointed queen to be able to achieve their goals and their desires. Trump is a massive threat to that. And for people to say, I'm not going to vote, I mean, I hear that all the time. That's absurd. From Christians saying, I'm not going to vote. This, to me, is appalling.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I want to get back to that in a moment because I really think we need to, as pastors, talk to my audience about the stewardship issue that they have to vote. But we've got two characters here. We've got Donald Trump and we've got Kamala Harris. Kamala consistently has shown herself to be a woman without character. And Donald Trump is a man of character. And I want to ask you, Dinesh, how do you evaluate the former president's and hopefully future president's character?
Well, this is very important because, as you know, there are some Christians, but there are also some Republicans who are wavering on Trump. And they say things like, well, I don't like the guy, but I like his policies. Or they say, he has a bad character, but he did a good job the last time around. Or he needs to shut his mouth. And so what people are doing is they're essentially saying that as an individual, he falls short. Now, interestingly, if you look at Trump, if you don't shy away and say, all right, let's make a list of his vices. Let's spell them out. All right, so people say, well, he's a playboy. Well, no one's saying he's a playboy now. He might have been a playboy at one time, but he's a reformed playboy. That's the worst you can say. All right, what else? He's an egomaniac. First of all, I think for someone under that kind of attack, if Trump didn't have some sort of an ego, your ego becomes a kind of protective wall. Any normal person would have crumbled under that kind of attack. But even though Trump seems a little narcissistical in public, because you know how he's a salesman, he's over the top. His rallies aren't just big, they're the biggest ever. And the burgers at Mar-a-Lago aren't just good, they're like the best burger ever made, that kind of thing. But in person, Trump is not like that. He's not boastful. He's actually kind of easygoing. And he shows a lot of interest in other people. Trump seems to be in public a kind of a bully, but he's only a bully of other bullies. He doesn't bully people who are beneath him. You never see him bully like a doorman or like a waiter or a cab driver. In fact, he shows a lot of interest in people. Hey, your son took an exam. How did that come out? So if someone is narcissistical, you don't ask that. You don't show that kind of interest in people. And then, in a time such as this, I think the primary political virtue that's needed, courage, bravery. And Trump has that in spades. I mean, this guy has more bravery than basically pretty much everybody else put together, because I don't know anyone. Well, first of all, I don't know any other Republican who could have endured 3 criminal charges, let alone 91. And let's remember, this guy he went 76 years of his life with no criminal charges. Right? So it's not like he's a habitual criminal. This guy has no charges, and then in the year he's running for president the second time, 91 in all these different jurisdictions. It's on the face of it absurd. And the other thing is, look at his reaction to the 2 assassination attempts. I mean, it's a demonstration of unrehearsed and singular courage of a kind that, you'd have to go back to like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, in 1912 was giving a speech. Someone shot him. A bullet went into his body. He refused to stop speaking. He finished his speech. and then he went and got medical attention, had the bullet removed. So Trump is in that kind of company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I look at what he does, and I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, what this man has been doing is showing America. Not only does he love America, he's willing to put his money where his mouth is. He's willing to put his life on the line, and he's doing this very consistently, which is something that people need to really pay attention to. I mean, I don't know how many people go into office and walk out with less wealth. Most people go in. I mean, I don't know how a bartender from New Jersey who can't afford a bus ticket to Washington, D.C. can end up with a net worth a few years later of $8 million. We see AOC, and that's the case. I mean, these are people are becoming very, very rich off the backs of the American people. How is this that he goes in and he's got all of these criminal charges racked up against him, and yet he wakes up every morning with one thing in mind, and that is to protect the American people?
I can't think of any other motive, right? If the 3 of us had $1 billion, we had Mar-a-Lago, and we had 10 years to live, we have grandchildren, so that's on one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, all these charges, people who want to kill you, and all of that would go away if you were to say, all right, I'm just going to retreat into my private paradise. And so he doesn't do it, and that's very telling. You said earlier something that struck me about Kamala Harris, and she's the anointed one. This anointing is cosmetic. And I say that because there's a secret gang of people who are running this country right now. We don't even know all their names. We could make some educated guesses about who's in that group, but even Biden wasn't running the show. I think we all know. Biden was sitting in the canoe, but he wasn't steering the canoe. And I think the deal with Biden was always, we will move you to the front, but we tell you what to do. You don't tell us. And then at some point, if you become inconvenient, we have the right to move you out. We can hit the eject button, which is what happened. I think Kamala is in on the same deal. Namely, she's the face of the party. They want to get her across the finish line, but she will be a pawn of the junta that's running the country. And frankly, if she becomes a liability, a millstone, they will remove her, just like they removed Biden. So the very scary thing is, I think we're getting from the Democratic Party this deal. We're not going to tell you who's running the country. Just know that we are. So the regime is where the power is. And these people like Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, they are the ventriloquist dummies who are being put out front.
What do you say to the people, though, that, because I've been trying to go out of my way to talk to people who say they're going to vote for Kamala and ask them, give me one. I want one reason, one policy, one thing she's done or has promised to do. Just one that you think is good, and they can't tell me anything. So what do we do with people like that just they clearly can't see it? They don't understand that it's being run by a different group, by a group of people. They believe that it's this one person.
Yeah, I think that the election is kind of a referendum on Trump. It's very unusual because normally an election is a referendum on the guys who are supposedly running the show. And it's kind of an iron law in American politics that, if people don't like the direction of the country, the normal instinct is, like, throw the bums out, bring someone else in. And the only question, because I remember my mind flashing back now to 1980, there was a little uncertainty about Reagan because there was a caricature of Reagan. He's a washed-up movie actor. He's a complete fool. He'll blow up the world. So the American people had to get a good look at him and go, no, that's not going to happen. And then the election swung from Carter to Reagan really in the last couple of weeks. It could be that we are in a similar moment where the tide is just moving toward Trump. I mean, I kind of feel it. Mm-hmm. And what it is people are taking a good look at Trump and they're realizing, the Halloween mask doesn't match the guy. He's not a scary guy. He may be scary to them, to the regime, but he's not scary to the Constitution. I mean, look, the guy was already in power before, right? It's one thing if you said, he will do this and he will do that. But when someone's been in office and they haven't done those things, the dictatorial allegation sort of begins to lose its luster.
Yeah. I just was at North Carolina, had this whole event there. It's called the 11th Hour. He brought out spiritual leaders to talk to them about what's going on, where we're at in America. And it just so happens that just before that event, Kamala Harris comes out and basically puts down a Christian man who said Jesus is Lord. And she says, hey, you think you're at the wrong rally. And Donald Trump came out very strong to say, this is the rally that person should be. If there's a right rally, he says, we embrace Christians, we embrace people who are people of faith, and he really is putting a call out to people of faith in America. And right now, we look at the number of Christians that don't vote. And Pastor Tom, I want to ask you, what do you say to the Christian that's not voting? I mean, obviously, this is a stewardship issue. So what do you tell them?
Yeah, well, for me, it's appalling. I can look at it biblically. You have different things. I've had people tell me, a gentleman approached me at a conference I was speaking at, and he said, there's no mandate in the Bible that says I should vote. And he was actually, on his account, he was genuinely asking me that question. Why should I vote? But a lot of those come across the opposite, right?
Right.
So I said to him, well, let's just look at the Old Testament. If you go back to the prophet Jeremiah, just take one prophet. What did he do? He was casting his voice against the king, against the judges, against the princes, even against religious leaders for what Judah was doing, Jerusalem was doing, the leaders at that time. And I said, you have the opportunity, because you are an American, to cast your vote like Jeremiah did. That's what he did. I said, voting gives you a voice against the king, against the queen in this case, whatever it is, against the queen and king makers, which you could totally see Mr. Ice Cream Man wasn't running anything.
Right.
It's how could you not vote? And then you can take the parable of the talents. You have the 10, the 5, and the 1 talent. The first gentleman with the 10 talents, he went out, invested, and the Lord said, blessings to you. Same with the one with the 5 talents. The one that was given 1 talent, what happened? He buries it in the ground. He says, well, I know that you were a hard master. You were going to return one day. So I actually sat out. I didn't actually do anything. Jesus says, fit for you is the weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a remarkable thing. This is what these kind of people who call themselves Christian are saying, no, I know you're difficult. No, Lord, I only respect you. So I don't respect Trump. I don't believe him. He's not a perfect man. So I'm just going to bury that talent. To me, that's shocking.
Right.
But that's what people are doing. Here's an opportunity for the Christian to say, I'm supposed to be salt and light in this world. I'm supposed to let my light shine. But no, I'm just going to sit it out. Yeah, they're all evil. Kamala's going to, if she wins, what are you doing? It's casting a vote for darkness when you just sit this out. And I just think it's an absolutely a terrible thing for a Christian to be able to have this opportunity and not seize the moment, because it is dark. It is and what are we supposed to be in the darkness? We are supposed to be light. Well, then let your light shine and stop being a coward. This is a cowardly thing to not be involved, Tim. You've talked about that a lot. To not be involved. This is so simple to vote.
Right.
You don't even have to go to a school board meeting to vote. And these people won't even do that, let alone go to a school board meeting.
Right. Yeah, think about so many stories in the Bible where God is accomplishing his will. And this is what I hear. Well, God's sovereign. He's going to do what he wants anyways. Well, we read story after story where, God's going to do what he's going to do, but he uses people to do it. The men had to march around Jericho. They had to march around. They had something they had to do. We look at us in America. We have Christians. We have something to do. And I have people tell me all the time, well, I just don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. I hear that quite a bit. I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. And Ben Carson on this last Monday night at that event said something that I've been telling people for a long time is, listen, unless you're voting for Jesus, you're always voting for the lesser of two evils.
Well, not only that, but I mean, if you didn't vote for the lesser of two evils, you shouldn't have voted for Reagan. I mean, you shouldn't have voted for the Bushes, and you shouldn't have voted. The point being that if you look at the pro-life issue, which you mentioned earlier, a lot of these well-meaning Republicans over the past 40 years said, we will take on Roe versus Wade. We will try to overturn this ruling. We will try to return this to the states as it was before. This was the agreed upon objective of the pro-life movement. Ironically, here comes Trump, and just in terms of his personal sort of religiosity, he's maybe less so than, say, Bush was, for example. But this guy ends up being the guy who delivers the goods. I mean, he's the David whose slingshot brings down Goliath, so to speak.
Right.
And so it's particularly strange then to say, wait a minute, Never David,
Right.
I'm making a parody of Never Trump, because I think for a lot of Christians, they've actually adopted the gospel of niceness. And the gospel of niceness is actually a good gospel when the situation is like that. Before I came to America, I didn't know much about the country, but I'd watch films. And my favorite genre was the Western. And it took me many years to realize that all Westerns have the same plot. But the plot is you've got a town. It's kind of like Shinbone or Pleasantville. And let's think of that as America. It's a very peaceful place. Everything's going well. There's a saloon. There's a provision store. There's an old sheriff. He's sort of the old GOP establishment, And then some ruthless gangsters come in and they just shoot up the town. They take over the place. That's where we are now, right? So the gospel of niceness doesn't really work because we are in a dire situation. We actually need somebody who is an 800-pound gorilla who can take on the 800-pound gorilla that has made our country not the same as it was before. Right? So in the Western, that's the guy who comes over the mountain, right? That's Clint Eastwood. That's John Wayne. And very often that guy, is a bit shady. I mean, nothing is known about him. What's his past? Where does he come from? Where's his family and so on? You don't know. But what you do know is that the gangsters recognize that this guy is a threat. He's the guy they have to take out.
Right.
And so we're living through that plot right now. Now, if you've seen the movie High Noon, in that movie, there's only one guy, the old sheriff, who's able to take on these guys. And yet the townspeople, they don't want him. They're like, take off. We don't need you. And so we see a peculiar situation where you have a lot of people who are not themselves capable of fighting against the ruthless gangsters. They're scared of them. They're intimidated by them. Trump not only isn't, he sort of enjoys it. I mean, he takes a certain relish in the fight. And so, in my view, we're very lucky to have a guy like this. It's almost like, he was sent over the mountain, maybe providentially, and instead of getting behind him. So I think the motive of the people who subscribe to the gospel of niceness is they don't themselves want to get on the battlefield. They want to be deserters. They're terrified. And so what they do is they turn their own weakness into a virtue. So in other words, they say, I'm too principled to fight. I'm so wonderful. I have such high ethics that I refuse to set on the battlefield. I think that running away from the battlefield is my highest moral duty. It's a very bizarre situation. It's not a real argument, but it is a way of coping with weakness.
Yeah. Well, I have so much to say about the whole Christian niceness gospel, and I'm going to remind my producer to have me do a whole entire episode on that coming up because I think it's important to talk about that. We are, as Christians, never called to be nice. I'll talk about that later on another program. We are all out of time. Dinesh, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to ask you have a new movie coming out. How can people get a hold of it?
The film's out, available for streaming and DVDs. The website is vindicatingtrump.com. So the movie's called Vindicating Trump. There's a book of the same title available in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places.
All right. And people could follow you how?
Just at Dinesh D'Souza on X, and I do a daily podcast. It's just called the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
All right. Thank you so much. And Pastor Tom, you've got your own programs. Can you tell us how to connect with you?
HopeForOurTimes.com is the easiest way to do it. Everything is there, all of the videos, the interviews, books, whatever is updated news, things from Dinesh D'Souza, whatever it is, HopeForOurTimes.com.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate both of you gentlemen, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in online. I want to remind you, go